You probably think you know what a deadly heat wave looks like. Maybe you remember that brutal week in the Pacific Northwest a few years back, or the Chicago heat wave that killed hundreds in the 1990s. But let me tell you about the summer that literally killed America, when temperatures soared so high for so long that the country just broke. I've been obsessed with weather disasters since I was a kid, and this story has haunted me ever since I first read it in an old newspaper archive. The summer of 1980 wasn't just hot, it was apocalyptic. The summer of 1980 started normally enough. Americans were dealing with the Iran hostage crisis, watching the Olympics boycott unfold, and complaining about gas prices, typical 1980 stuff. Nobody saw coming what would become the deadliest natural disaster in American history that most people have never heard of. By the time it was over, 1,700 Americans were dead. Crops across the heartland would be destroyed. The economy would lose $56 billion in today's money, and the country would learn that sometimes Mother Nature doesn't just inconvenience you, she tries to kill you. It started in June 1980 with what meteorologists politely called a persistent high-pressure system. That's science speak for the atmosphere is broken and we're all going to suffer. A massive dome of high pressure parked itself over the central United States and refused to move. Imagine a giant invisible lid sitting over half the country, trapping hot air underneath and cooking everything slowly. That's essentially what happened, except it was not metaphorical. It was literally life and death. The temperatures weren't just hot, they were historically, impossibly, dangerously hot. Dallas hit 117 degrees Fahrenheit. Wichita Falls, Texas saw 117 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 straight days. Kansas City reached 115 degrees Fahrenheit. These weren't just numbers on a thermometer, they were death sentences for anyone without proper cooling. But here's what made 1980 different from previous heat waves. It lasted forever. This wasn't a few brutal days that you could survive by hiding indoors. This was weeks and weeks of relentless, murderous heat that just wouldn't break. Memphis had 69 days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Little Rock saw 71 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Some cities went entire months without a single day below 90 degrees Fahrenheit. I spent hours looking at the weather data from that summer, and it reads like something from another planet. The upper Midwest, which usually provides relief from summer heat, turned into a furnace. Minneapolis, where people go to escape hot weather, hit 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Milwaukee reached 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Chicago saw temperatures that belonged in Death Valley, not the shores of Lake Michigan. What really gets me is how unprepared everyone was. Air conditioning existed in 1980, but it was not universal like today. A lot of older folks, especially in northern cities that rarely saw brutal heat, just did not have air conditioning. They had lived their whole lives without needing it, so why start now? Except now meant temperatures that could literally cook you to death. The power grids started failing as everyone with air conditioning cranked it to maximum. Rolling blackouts hit cities across the Midwest. Imagine it is 110 degrees Fahrenheit outside, your air conditioning has just died, and the power company has no idea when it will be back. That is not discomfort. That is a survival situation. The deaths were not dramatic. There were no sudden catastrophes, no buildings collapsing, no explosions. People just died. Quietly, slowly, alone in their apartments. Most victims were elderly people living alone without air conditioning. They would close their windows to keep the hot air out, not realizing they were creating ovens. Their body temperatures would rise gradually over hours or days. Their organs would shut down one by one. Many were found days later by worried neighbors or family members. What haunts me about this story is how preventable most deaths were. These were not people caught in sudden disasters. They were your grandparents, slowly dying in their living rooms while the rest of the world went about its business. The death toll mounted quietly. Detroit lost 200 people. St. Louis lost 150 people. Kansas City buried dozens. Small towns across Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas each lost a handful of residents. The numbers seemed manageable individually, but they added up to a national tragedy that unfolded in slow motion. I've talked to farmers who lived through 1980, and they still get this haunted look when they describe what happened to their crops. The corn didn't just wilt, it literally cooked in the fields. Corn needs water, and in 1980, there wasn't any. The same high-pressure system that trapped the heat also blocked rain clouds. Most of the Corn Belt saw less than half its normal rainfall. Some areas got virtually no rain for months. Picture driving through Iowa in July 1980. Instead of the endless green fields you'd expect, you'd see brown. Acres and acres of brown, dying crops stretched to the horizon. Corn that should have been 8 feet tall was stunted at 4 feet, with ears that never developed. Soybeans withered in the ground. Farmers watched decades of work evaporate before their eyes. Many had to sell cattle because they could not afford feed or water for them. Dairy farmers saw milk production plummet as cows suffered in the heat. Some ranchers just walked away from farming altogether. The economic damage was staggering. Crop losses exceeded $20 billion in 1980 dollars. That is over $60 billion today. Entire rural communities that depended on agriculture faced economic collapse. Small-town businesses closed when farmers could not afford to shop. The ripple effects lasted for years. Urban areas became heat islands where concrete and asphalt absorbed heat all day and radiated it all night. City temperatures often stayed above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, even at midnight, giving people no relief. I think the most tragic aspect was how isolated many victims were. In smaller communities, neighbors checked on each other. But in big cities, people disappeared into apartment buildings and nobody noticed until it was too late. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed with heat-related illnesses. Heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and dehydration filled the hospitals with people whose bodies had simply stopped functioning in the extreme temperatures. The morgues filled up too. Cities ran out of space for bodies. Temporary refrigeration trucks were brought in to store the dead. The infrastructure of death could not handle the volume of people who succumbed to the heat. AI air conditioners, the one technology that could save lives, started failing under the strain. Units designed for normal summer temperatures could not handle weeks of 110 degrees Fahrenheit plus. They would overheat and break down, leaving their owners defenseless. The electrical grid was never designed for everyone to run air conditioning simultaneously for weeks on end. Power plants struggled to meet demand. Transformers exploded. Rolling blackouts became daily occurrences in many cities. Cars broke down constantly. Radiators boiled over. Tires blew out on superheated pavement. Interstate highways became graveyards of overheated vehicles. AAA could not keep up with the calls for assistance. Even infrastructure melted. Railroad tracks warped in the heat, causing train delays and derailments. Airport runways became too soft for planes to land safely. Roads buckled and cracked under temperatures they were never designed to withstand. This was 1980, remember? No internet, no cell phones, no modern emergency alert systems. Getting information to people about cooling centers and emergency services was a massive challenge. FEMA existed, but disaster response was much more limited than today. The federal government could provide some financial assistance after the fact, but there was no coordinated national response to save lives during the emergency. Local governments did what they could. Cities opened cooling centers in libraries, community centers, and schools. But many elderly people did not know about them or could not get to them. Public transportation was unreliable in the heat, and many victims did not have cars. The social safety net that we take for granted today was much thinner in 1980. Fewer social services, less organized community outreach, minimal public health emergency protocols. People were largely on their own. Here is something that amazes me. This disaster received relatively little media coverage while it was happening. The deaths were scattered across dozens of cities and rural areas, so there was no single dramatic event for news cameras to focus on. Heat wave deaths are not good television. There are no collapsed buildings, no dramatic rescues, no obvious villains to blame. Just numbers rising slowly on health department tallies, not exactly compelling TV news. The economic damage was reported in agricultural trade publications, but it did not capture national attention the way a hurricane or earthquake would. The suffering was real but invisible to most Americans. It was not until years later that researchers compiled the full death toll and realized the 1980 heat wave had killed more Americans than most hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods combined. Like most disasters, the 1980 heat wave hit the poor and elderly hardest. Wealthy people had air conditioning and could afford to run it constantly. They could escape to cooler climates or air-conditioned shopping centers. Poor families could not afford the electric bills that came with running air conditioning all summer. Elderly people on fixed incomes faced the choice between cooling and eating. Many chose to tough it out and died as a result. Urban heat islands meant that poor neighborhoods, often with less tree cover and more concrete, got even hotter than wealthy areas with parks and green spaces. Environmental injustice was literally a matter of life and death. The 1980 heat wave changed American agriculture permanently. Farmers shifted to drought-resistant crops. Irrigation systems were expanded, and farming practices were modified to deal with extreme heat. Building codes in many areas were updated to require better insulation and improved cooling systems. Public health departments developed heat wave response plans. Emergency management protocols were revised to address slow-moving disasters. The experience also accelerated the adoption of air conditioning. By 1990, air conditioning penetration among vulnerable populations increased significantly. What had been a luxury became recognized as a life-saving necessity. Looking back now, the 1980 heat wave feels like a preview of what climate scientists say we should expect more frequently. The weather patterns that caused it, persistent high-pressure systems that trap heat for weeks, are becoming more common. The difference is that we are better prepared now. Modern emergency management systems, stronger building codes, more widespread air conditioning, and improved public health responses mean a similar heat wave today would probably kill fewer people. But it is sobering to realize that one summer could kill 1,700 Americans and economically devastate entire regions. Mother Nature demonstrated in 1980 that she does not need hurricanes or earthquakes to cause catastrophic damage. Sometimes she just needs to turn up the thermostat and leave it there. The 1980 heat wave taught America that extreme weather is not just inconvenient, it is deadly. Heat waves kill more Americans than hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and lightning combined in most years. They are just quieter about it. The disaster also revealed how vulnerable our infrastructure and social systems are to sustained stress. When basic services fail for weeks, civilization becomes fragile quickly. Most importantly, it showed that individual preparedness is not enough. Community-wide responses, robust public health systems, and infrastructure designed for extreme conditions are matters of life and death. For those who lived through that brutal summer of 1980, the memories remain vivid. The relentless heat, the brown fields, the rolling blackouts, the slow realization that this was not just a bad heat wave, but a historical disaster unfolding in real time. The summer of 1980 killed 1,700 Americans and changed how we think about heat, infrastructure, and emergency preparedness. It remains a sobering reminder that sometimes the most dangerous disasters are the ones that kill you slowly, quietly, and without warning.